All right, we're back. It's COMP391, and it's week 6, lesson 6, part 3. We've already kind of, part 1 and part 2 was kind of the double Blender hour, where we did, first part was text, learn how to do Blender text, and the second part was logic bricks, where we started to learn about programming with Blender. We're going to continue that next week, but today we're going to go into story elements. And again, this course kind of focuses on game creation, and all that kind of stuff, as well as using tools to help us with game creation, right? So today we're going to talk about story elements. Let's get back into that. And we're using that book, Game Development Essentials, which is actually quite cool. One thing before we get into this actually is I should mention that next week we would be slated to do an exam, right? We're supposed to do an exam by week 7. I think what I'm going to do, just because there's probably a lot of exams you get going on next week, is I'll push it off 1 week. So I think we'll do exam week 8, so the week before the break. So I think our break in this semester happens week 9, equivalent, right? Just because that weird July 1st holiday or whatever, the way it falls. So I think what we'll do is we won't do an exam next week. We'll do week 7. What we'll do is we'll put together a more Blender stuff and whatever, catch up on some of the stuff we're doing, and then have enough material so that we can get into the exam and then not replicate too much of what we did on the test. Because I don't want to just do more of the same stuff, right? Yeah.
Are we doing presentations next week?
Yes, that's why I'm saying. So it'll be because next week we're supposed to have an exam too, right? So there's no way I can do an exam if you're presenting your review, right? So again, next week, Friday, this time slot, 4:30, we're going to be doing, where the main thing we're going to be doing is I want to hear your review of your game that you played for 4 hours. So if you haven't had a chance to do it, please pick a game. I recommend highly that it's something that you haven't played before. I think it's better. It'll give you more of a challenge and kind of make it more interesting for everybody if you've played something that no one else has played, or even if it's something that you haven't played before and you want to check it out. Make sure it's something that you enjoy. Right? Like if normally it's the genre you like to play. I'm not going to force you to do something you hate. Like if you don't like playing first-person shooters, I'm not going to make John over here play first-person shooters because he told me he doesn't like them, right? He gets bored of those things. So for me, to make him play it is like unfair, right? So for you guys, pick the genre that you like. Is my thinking, right? It may cost you a little bit, but I know we've been hearing about this whole Steam thing that's free for the summer. So or I guess summer discounts is what it is, right? So maybe that's the way you want to go. But pick a platform. It's only going to be one platform you're going to be talking about, like I said. So if you play on an Xbox or a PC or a Mac or whatever you're going to play on, then report on that. Don't say, well, it's like this on the PC and it's on this on the Mac. I don't expect you to play 3 different versions of the same game. It's not about that. It's just that one game. I want you to get your rating, and if you remember what's involved in the game, it's pros and cons and kind of a summary of how the game is, right? So give me 3 good things, 3 bad things, and then I want you to write out your review and check it for spelling. Make sure you get someone to read it for you, because this is part of that KPI stuff that the higher ups keep talking about. It's not just about game and simulation that we're doing here. It's also about presentation skills, about writing skills, about building you guys up as generalists, so you guys can kind of get out there, and maybe if you have to do a little bit of writing content or whatever, then you've done some stuff here. In this nice safe environment we call college, right? So that's one thing, just to mention that. So I'm pushing that off to week 8, just from a scheduling perspective. That's a scheduling change that's coming up. Okay. Part 2 is, like I said, I don't know how this is working for you, but right now, like I said, I try and break up Blender and the theory piece. Again, today will be 2 hours of theory as opposed to 1 and 1. So bear with me. This is a good part, though. I think this is a good place to do this, because we're talking about story elements, and there's some really important stuff here, stuff I'm really passionate about, like I said before, to talk about, and I think that can make a real difference in your story design or in your game design. So let's get into it. So we're talking about story and character development here today, and I think this is probably one of the most important pieces in today's games. It doesn't matter whether you're making an action type game or whether you're making a real-time strategy game or a role-playing game or whatever you're doing, story is like becomes super important today. I mean, who's ever played a story? You guys play a story that's really goddamn boring and you don't want to play the game again, right? Well, even if it's a cool game, even if it's a shoot 'em up game, you play it and it's an action game, played it a couple times, you've done it, and there's no surprises. It's the exact same every time you play it. Unless you want to beat the game and remember all the levels and how to get through, a lot of people abandon it after the first time around. Like they've done it, they've played it through, and then it's over, right? Especially if the story kind of has a kind of a poor ending. It doesn't finish well, right? I like always to think about it as the end game, kind of thing. And I think you mentioned it, Matt, earlier, which is like, you play a round of golf, right? And you're doing well, and then you mess up at the, at the last, the last part. Your last 3 holes are crap, or you're doing really well. Every time you start off, you get a great range and stuff when you start off, but then at the end, when you're on the green, you mess up, right? And a lot of these games do that. There's a lot of games out there that still really, really start well. It's almost like they've lost momentum, or maybe they lost their funding, or something happened at the end that they had to wrap it up really quickly. And you see these fatal flaws that these games have, right? Part of it to me is planning, right? So this is where it comes into it. So let's talk about story a little bit. And there's a nice little picture from your book of these cave paintings, right? So the earliest man, we used to gather around and we used to talk about, our stories. And one of the things we used to do all the time is how we would, chime in. We'd have to handshake, almost like. And part of it is this idea of, I'm looking at you, Vanessa. Vanessa, I'm looking at you. I see you. See that? I see you. I know this is kind of weird, but that's what we would do when we're talking about stories. It's about us recognizing each other and saying, I see you, Joshua. I see who you are. You see me. We connect. We break bread together, like in an environment, right? And that's part of this whole idea. And then we start talking about the stories, right? And stories made up our culture. The verbal language, oral history was how we always started out, right? And we talked about conflict that happened. This is the good thing that happened to me today. And the best stories were the ones where somebody had issues, whether they took issue with somebody, right? Someone caused them a problem and how they dealt with it, right? Or if it had something really cool happen that was unexpected, right? That's how it was. So it's kind of the same as what happens today. If you watch a movie today and it's all bing, bang, and flash, but there's no story, right? You come out of it feeling let down a little bit. A good example of that is, you can see there's tons of examples. One of them, the latest one that I didn't like a lot was Tomorrowland, right? I thought Tomorrowland was supposed to be a much better story. I was hoping that it would be. And when I saw George Clooney in it, I was like, hey, cool, right? I was like, good, solid A actor. Although not that he hasn't done bad movies before, but I wanted to see that it was good. It was a good premise. It was, kind of a future story. Whenever you get into this whole time travel element, I don't care if you see it on The Flash on TV or something else, right? Whenever I get to time travel, right, somehow time travel messes up any story that I've ever seen, right? And so I kind of expected it. I knew it was a good ride and everything else, but it didn't do it for me. It was like, it kind of let me down. And why did it let me down? Because I always look at it like this. A story, in my books, and I guess from all the stuff I've read, is it's kind of a series of setups and payoffs. I don't know if you understand what I mean. So here's my setup. I'm gonna serve the ball. It's up in the air. I'm gonna hit the ball, right? Okay, what if I do this? I'm gonna serve the ball. It goes up in the air, and then it just falls, right? Nothing happens, right? I hate when that happens. I hate when a story sets up all this stuff to happen, and none of it ever happens. Or the stuff that happens is just like a big denouement, right? It's like a big wow. That didn't really pay off so much. And that's what I felt it was like with Tomorrowland, as an example. If you're going to see this movie, it's not a bad movie, but it's not a great movie. And it's the reason why is because there's a lot of setups with no payoffs, right? So think about that a little bit. And think about every scene that you see in every movie and every game that you play, right? If the setup is big, right, you're going to fight the boss monster. And the boss monster is super easy to beat, right? It kind of sucks at the end. Why would I play a boss monster that's super easy to beat? But they set you up. They tell you about the boss monster through the entire RPG, right? Oh my God, the boss monster is going to knock your head off. And then you build you up to the point where, through side quests and everything else, where your character is like ultra powerful. So when you get to the boss monster, he's a flea, right? I've played that so many times in so many games where it's like that, especially in Diablo. There's a good example of that. You play in Diablo, and at the end, where you're supposed to face the boss monster, right? He's nothing, because you've built up to like level 100 already, by the time you're there. So I don't know. It's kind of like, again, a series of setups and payoffs. And this is the thing when it comes to storytelling, traditional storytelling, right? If you think about it, because it's all oral. There was no movies or anything else. If anything, they had like some kind of flame, and they would look at they would kind of do a cave painting and everything else like this to record their story, right? And this is probably the first, kind of transition from oral, us talking about a story, to visual, us showing you what the story was about and recording it so that other future generations can see it again. Again, one of the first visual storytelling elements here is what we looked at. So how about ideas? Where the hell does these writers get ideas from? I know some people, I think, and it says it right from the book. It says, write what you know, right? But what about the stuff that you don't know? How do we write stories about science fiction, like traveling to other worlds and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, you really don't know what it's like to travel to other worlds, right? But whenever I think about writing these kind of stories, it's always, I don't care so much about the technology. Technology is the bing, bang, boom that's going to get me into, people are going to be interested in understanding a story about that. It's how you deal with the technology. Like, one of the most important things for me whenever I watch a superhero movie or show is, how does a superhero truly deal with his powers, right? Like, a good example of that would be Netflix's Daredevil lately. I don't know if you guys seen that or catch that or not. That's a great show, right? That's one of the best shows I've seen. It's more realistic superhero show you can see, right? It's good. It's gritty, right? It's down to earth. And Daredevil is like if anything, he's got some really cool vision, and that's it. Maybe he can take a lot of punishment, and maybe that's the other power that he's got, but that's it. Beyond that, he's not super strong. He's not super fast. He's got some really cool martial arts capabilities, and that's all. And he's down and gritty. And it's really not about his superpowers for Daredevil. It's truly about why he's doing what he's doing, right? We can have all kinds of technology. We can, I don't know, if you see a movie, and like The Matrix is a good example of that, back in '99. I don't know if you guys, maybe it's a little bit too old for you. But for me, if you guys ever see The Matrix? Okay. Some people may not. I'm just telling you, there might be people that have never seen that before for whatever reason, right? But I think a great scene in that movie is, the whole setup again for him, right? Which is, and I'm going to talk about setups and payoffs here a little bit today. So the setup, Neo, he is in his ordinary world. We're going to talk about this whole monomyth thing in a second, and you'll see where I'm going with this. Let's use Neo and not Star Wars, because they always use Star Wars and Luke Skywalker. Which I'm not a real fan of using that over and over again. I think it's a great story, but I think we got to use something else. So Neo, he's a hacker. He's in his own ordinary world. He's caught up in being a hacker, but he knows there's something else out there. There's the dark net. There's the other side of the internet, and he's a rebel. He's a bit of a rebel, right? And finally he gets to the point where he realizes that his ordinary world isn't the real world at all, right? That he's been offered an opportunity to kind of go behind the scenes. Neil Gaiman, if you ever read American Gods or anything like that, he calls it behind the curtain, right? Where you actually go, there's like the world behind the world, right? And we can go into that magical world behind the world and go behind the curtain, and kind of, it allows us to move outside of the world's regular flow, right? Just like in The Matrix, where he actually came out of the Matrix and back into the real world, where it was a broken world, right? Outside of where the machine controls the environment, right? He went behind the curtain. And now, all of a sudden, he's now into this new world. Every story is like this. You go from the ordinary world, where the hero doesn't know anything. The classic of this would be, and I hate to say this, the young man who gets taught by an older mentor, who becomes like a superhero and then comes back and now he's the master of both worlds, right? This is the classic Hollywood story. If you see it, you've seen it 20 times. And Bollywood's big of that, eh? It does a lot of that with Bollywood. And I'll tell you right now, I've seen a lot of Bollywood movies lately where the guy's like, he starts off, he's like a peasant, and now he's like a superhero at the end, like literally, right? And it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. It hits us all over the place. It's like the Hollywood formula, like if anything else that's happening right now. And it's been happening for years. So going back to Matrix, he's given the choice: take the blue pill, right, or take the red pill. Remember which pill was the one that takes him into the Matrix, right? Was it the red pill? There's one of the pills that take him out. That's trivia for you guys, if you guys remember, right? Was that the blue pill, right? Take the blue pill, right, and see how far the rabbit hole goes, right? How deep the rabbit hole goes. And when he goes into this other world, he can never go back. There is no turning back, literally, for him. They cut the ways of him getting back to this ordinary world that he came from, right? Good story elements, right? I think where it lets me down, right, a little bit, and that's in the sequels, right, is where it let me down. I think if they stopped it at the Matrix, I would have been perfectly happy with that. But because they went to the sequels and they did this whole thing where he became like the Messiah and all this kind of stuff, like it really, I think the Wachowskis, I think they told a great story in the beginning, and then the second and the third story just went flat. It was almost like they did two movies at once, and I hate when they do that, by the way, when they make two movies at once. Back to the Future and Back to the Future 2 and 3 were a really good example of that back in the 80s. And Back to the Future, great movie. Back to the Future 2 and 3, you just throw it out the window. It's like it's really bad, right? And they did that with a lot of other things. One time where it really worked, I think, well, from a continuity perspective, talk about story again, is Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. That's where you made like 3 movies at once, or the whole movie continuum, and then you're watching it every Christmas that's coming out, and it's a really cool movie, right? Because why? They've made it all at once, and it's got the same continuity, you know, because if they made it too much later, then the characters would age and it would look weird, right? And there was just like 9 hours of movie that you could watch, and if you bought the DVDs, there's like 12 hours of movie with the uncut scenes and everything else that's come out. Really good stuff. But for the most part, when you make a movie that's got sequels, I always find the sequels fall short. An exception to that is Star Wars, right? Where Star Wars, first movie is kind of cool, second movie is awesome. Empire Strikes Back is truly the best of the 3. I'm talking about the original Star Wars, 4, 5, and 6, not the 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 were not the original Star Wars movies. 1, 2, and 3 are, as soon as they started talking about midichlorians, I was like, this is not Star Wars. I don't want to know about midichlorians and what controls the Force. I want to know about the way it was done before. The Force is everywhere. The Force is between us. It's in you. It's in me. It's that whole mystical thing that we didn't know what it was before. Once you start, putting down parameters about what the Force is all about, now you've taken that mystical element and thrown it out the window, right? I don't want to know about that. Don't show me what's inside the engine. I just want to drive the car, right? That's what it's about for me. It's about the ride, right? So going back to that, how do we generate our ideas? Some people, it's really truly about what you know. It's not the traipsing, the stuff that we color the story with technology, with a fantasy element or whatever, some kind of genre. It's not the genre that makes it for me. It's really, at the end of the day, it's the story. So we are going to write about the characters' troubles, about the characters' conflicts that come from inside of you, that reflect your conflicts. You're going to take those conflicts and transform them and create villains like the ones you've seen before, but exaggerate those villains. Make those villains come alive, right? As an example, into a story idea that you can use in a movie, you can use in a novel or a short story, you can use in a video game, right? If you can do that, you're going to make a great video game. You're going to be great designers, right? Take something that's from inside of you that you love, that you have a passion for, right, and put it into a visual medium. You're going to be great. Once you start putting stuff together because of money, once you start going down that path, you're not going to make a great game. You're not going to make a great movie, and it's not going to be a good novel. Once it's all about money for you, a great friend of mine said it to me. He's an animator. He's been animating for, I guess, good on 20 years now, 25 years. He did classic animation at Sheridan. He's done movies and different kinds of shows. And his thing was this: as soon as he started getting into the industry, sometimes it can be a soul-sucking job, right? Because it's not just about making a really cool story anymore. It's about, and depending on who you work for, sometimes you work for great people, that it is about making a great product. Now he works for Ubisoft, and for them it's really truly about making a great product, right? But it's about, for some people it's about money, and once it gets to that point, it ruins story. So ideas coming from inside you, The idea here is once you get that idea, that boiling thing that's trying to break out of your skin, that you want to write about, that you want to make. Example, we were talking about before class, this idea about I want to make the superhero game. I was talking about with Matt. And one of the things I love about games is the game within a game. Like, you know, when you create your character for the first time, that part has to be super awesome, right? Why? Because that's the stuff that makes me want to play the game over and over again. That game within a game kind of thing, right? And the idea of the origin story, because no superhero game to date has really cool origin story that I've ever played anyway, that you know, that you can create, and you know, kind of a dual path. I'm just sharing this with you because if you guys can make one of these games, I'd play it all, like, for all the time, because I love superhero stuff, right? But the idea is how do you put those things down, and part of it is planning. You're going to learn about that. You're going to probably take at college here courses about project management, yeah? You're probably going to do that if you haven't done it already. Those courses about project management and planning are probably the most important courses for you when it comes to actually outputting something at the end of the day, right? We all can dream and start projects. Guys, by the way, are notorious at starting projects and never finishing them, right? We just love it. Girls are better, actually, at finishing the project off, more often than not, right? There's only a couple girls in the room. One is a visitor, right? And the other one, you know, she's great. And I know you're going to be great at finishing your stuff off, right? But the idea that I'm talking about is most guys, we start stuff off, right? And then we never get it done. Why? Because it's unorganized. We're unorganized. It's the same thing with story. Think about stories the way we write. Some people start off and you start writing and you write yourself into a corner and then you're done. It's like, you know, or you start off, you have this great idea, you talk to your girlfriend, your friend, whatever, about the story you have in your head. Hey, I got this really cool idea for a story. You talk about it, and once you talk about it, it's gone. It's never going to happen again. You're never going to write it, ever, because you've talked about it, right? So my suggestion to you is, and now that I've talked about the superhero thing, I'm never going to do it. But it's just the curse of talking about it. Don't talk about your damn stories. Just write them. Do it. Or put it down on paper. Start creating your master plan by planning. And what I mean by that is, which works for me, it may not work for you, is plot it out. But in order for you to plot it out, you need to understand story, right? And the good elements. First, we're going to talk about formula today, right? Because we need to talk about the formula, the monomyth. That's what we're going to start off with. And then you can break the formula and make your own. You're going to make adjustments to the formula to make it special, make it different. Again, what do they say in Hollywood? You know, give it to me the same, only different, right? That's the slogan they always tell you. If you give me a story, like a wacky movie that I've never seen before, it might appeal to 1% of the population and it could become a cult film, but it may be never a blockbuster, right? If you give me the same, only different, something that I've seen, I've heard this kind of story before, but you're going to give it to me in a different way, you know, there's the stories of a blockbuster right there. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Any story that's ever been written, or any story that you've ever seen has been done before in some way. That's the other thing that people tell you. I want to tell you that that's a complete lie. It's done, but not your story. Your story is going to be from inside you, your true story, the experiences you have, the conflicts that you've had in your life, you know, all that kind of stuff. The things that make you cry, the things that make you laugh, if you take those things and you put them down on paper and plot your stuff down, you're going to have a great video game, a great novel, a great film. Okay, we kind of talk about this a little bit for generating ideas. Let's talk about classic character archetypes. Carl Jung, this famous psychologist, and by the way, we talked about Carl Jung last chapter as well, when we talked about the whole idea of this personality type. Remember we talked about that with Insight's personality types, the blue person, the yellow person, the red person, the green person. The red person being this, you know, aggressive, action-oriented kind of person. You know, the yellow person being the intuitive kind of person, the creative type, the guy who knows where all the bodies are buried, that kind of guy, right? The green person who is the supportive type person, the tree-hugging lover of all things, you know, make love, not war. And then the blue person who's more of like the observer type, the kind of person that is very analytical. And then, of course, none of us are just one person. We're all a bunch of these different preferences, all made up to make our personality type. Well, Carl Jung did that, but he also kind of talked about this thing called the collective unconscious, and where we have this story that's inside of us that has to come out, that we want to kind of talk about stuff. Like, you know, when you talk to your friends, go to a party anytime. The first thing you guys do is you talk about your stuff, that happens, especially if you've seen your buddies for a long time. You talk about this stuff that you have that's happened to you, right? And it's the way you tell it. Some people are great storytellers. They talk about their stuff. Sometimes they're, there's something that we talk about, and it's almost like we especially when we make friends, we have this kind of collective story that we're talking about, and it's almost like you ever notice how this happens where we write stories like San Andreas, who's just come out, right, with The Rock and this whole disaster film movie. How many times every year, and I guess some of this is kind of a Hollywood conspiring against us and whatever, but there's another some kind of exactly the same kind of movie, but it's a different name. It's happened so many times. Meteor and whatchamacallit, some kind of other movie that was exactly the same, right? And it's almost like they have these movies that come up all around the same time. Superhero movies are really huge. Marvel's come up with like all this huge Phase 1, Phase 2 stuff. Now DC's coming up with all their stuff, but they're hitting the smaller screen more often than not, right? This whole thing that I'm waiting for is like, Batman versus Superman that's coming out next year, I believe, right? 2016, right? It's a big thing. Superhero movies are making real comeback, right? And then once Star Wars comes out at the end of this year, let's see what's going to happen with like space movies. They're going to all come back too, right? And that's what happens. It's almost like when we talk collective unconscious, we talk about almost like cultural shifts. Almost like we want to tell the same story. All of us are kind of in this mode. Zombies were a big thing now. We know we're totally talking about zombies, and sometimes it happens great. Walking Dead is a good example of fairly good zombie movie. All right. Some people don't like The Walking Dead, eh? You know what they say about The Walking Dead? It's the boring dead, right? It's like you watch The Walking Dead and it's like nothing ever happens. Was that? Some of the zombie logic doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Somehow, the zombie came out of nowhere and they ate you. But meanwhile there was no zombies around. And suddenly,
Sometimes, like they'll have the strength to rip you to pieces, and then suddenly they become so fragile.
It's kind of weird. We don't know why it is. Maybe they're going to explain it in this new spin-off, The Fear of the Walking Dead, that's coming out this summer. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. But the thing is, the reason why Walking Dead is so good is not because of the zombie genre. It's because of the story elements in the background. The characters are really cool. You want to know what's going to happen with Rick if he's going to self-destruct in The Walking Dead. You want to know what's going to happen with Carl. Is he going to grow up to be just another one like his dad, right? You want to know this stuff that's going to happen, and that's what makes it a great story. But then they've come up with these other zombie movies, like iZombie. That's a new one that just came out, right? Which is kind of a quirky, girl. She got scratched by a zombie, and now she's a zombie. But she's a zombie that's got, she's actually got intelligence, and she can continue to work as long as she continues to eat brains, right? She can keep her personality. iZombie, right? Then there's Zombie Nation. Don't watch that, right? It's crap. Right? But that's what I'm saying. They kind of come up, everyone's coming up with this thing. Sometimes it's because they want to ride the coattails of the zombie, stuff that's going on right now. Game of Thrones, there's another one. Game of Thrones is like, everyone's going nuts with Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, oh my God, they killed the Red Wedding, they killed you, blah, blah, blah. People go crazy, right? And the thing is, Game of Thrones, for me, has been like, I was reading Game of Thrones way before HBO came out with it and all that stuff. And I've been following, George R. R. Martin for forever and ever, right? I was always part of this whole fantasy thing. And I'm telling you, fantasy is going to make a comeback, and more of those kind of shows are going to happen. Spartacus is a good example of that. Spartacus, Game of Thrones, where they have this, like, hack and slash, killing, lots of gore and, sex on TV. And that's what really, what's coming on. People are watching it not just for the story, because the stories, you're following, it's like a cast of thousands on Game of Thrones, eh? You're trying to follow each character. If you don't know the story, really, you're going to get lost. Like, my wife looks at Game of Thrones and she goes, I can't, who was she again? Who's Cersei Lannister? Or was she the incestuous, like, queen? Yeah, that's the one, right? Okay, cool. She doesn't know because there's so many, it suffers from from characteritis sometimes, right? That's Game of Thrones. But the reason why people are starting to watch Game of Thrones is who's going to die today, right? That's like the kind of the big topic, because George R. R. Martin he's notorious for killing off his main characters, right? So again, we talked about collective unconscious, and it's almost like we try and create, this. And we talk about this, connection to these classic universal character types, if you will, and how the idea of a hero and the anti-hero and so on. And also the idea of stories that are actually happening in culture today. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the hero, right? We're going to talk about the hero's journey and that's Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell, you're going to hear about him. If you haven't heard about him from me or from before from me, you're going to hear about him today. Joseph Campbell is kind of the father of the monomyth. That's what he came up with. And Joseph Campbell was the first person, I would say, or one of the first people in the modern era, we're talking in the last century and this century, that really has spoken about the idea of, and by the way, he's an atheist, which is kind of weird too. He doesn't believe and he believes all religion is mythology, right? Of one form or another. So there's positives and negatives there, depending on what you believe. But the great thing about him is he really believes in this idea of the hero's journey, that all life, everybody's, your life is the hero's journey, right? That's what he really believes. If you listen to him, if you read his books, every one of his books, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is kind of his classic book, he talks about the hero's journey. I often talk about this with my friends. I say to myself, you ever hate somebody? Like really, truly hate somebody because he's really badass. He's like someone who's just really not nice, right? Guess what? For him, he's the hero of the story, and you're the villain in his book, right? The color of the sky is not Tom, right? The color of the sky for you is Vanessa, right? Because it's your story. It's the stuff that happens for you. And that's what he's talking about. Joseph Campbell's talking about the hero's journey, but it's about our journey, right? It's about what happens inside of us, right? And it's taking that journey and taking it and talking about it to other people through art and media and literature and video and video games and all that kind of stuff that we do. It's so, so important. If anything, you know what? I like, this is why I told you guys before, if I was going to get any tattoo, like on my skin, if I was going to tattoo anything, is like this nothos eafton, which is the Greek word, the Greek, ancient Greek for know thyself. It's like, actually, the Matrix has it in it. They have the Roman version when Neo goes to visit the Oracle, right? And he talks to her, and on top of her door, it says, that's the most important thing right there, know thyself, Neo, right? Because that's the most important part of the hero's journey. And the hero doesn't know himself when he starts off, right? The hero is just learning about himself, even if he's an old man when he starts off in the story, right? He doesn't quite know himself. But by the end of the story, if we want to make successful stories that sell in Hollywood, that don't just hit that 1% of the population, right? He becomes someone who knows more. He's grown by the end. And not only that, the villain has grown by the end. At the end of the story, right? The villain, the hero, the hero's partners, everybody in some way or another has changed. If that's not true, your story hasn't done what it's supposed to do. Okay? Or so they say. Let's talk about the shadow character, right? The Joker is a great example of the shadow character. The shadow character can also be represented as the adversary, right? Sometimes the adversary is something that you have inside of you. A good example of that is Dexter. Have you ever watched Dexter, right? Dexter is a great story, right? When it was out in HBO for a long time, and it's about a serial killer, right? That's the main story. The main protagonist, if you will, is a serial killer. But the great thing about Dexter, the spin they put on Dexter that lasted, that kept people watching for 10 seasons, was that he had this, this dark passenger is what he used to call it, that's inside of him, that he had to kill, right? But the way he used to channel his killing, his desire to kill, and he's the protagonist of the story, is to kill bad people, right? In fact, if anything, he's a superhero. He's just a vigilante or kind of a dark hero. That's what Dexter was, right? So the shadow character can be something outside the hero, like his adversary. But the shadow character can also be inside the hero, something that he has to combat all the time, like alcoholism. Something that's combating him. It doesn't have to be, remember, there's different kinds of conflict. There's internal conflict, the hero versus himself. There's external conflict, the hero versus nature, the hero versus technology, the hero versus his antagonist, whatever it is, right? But these kinds of conflicts, this other archetype, the shadow, is something that you need. You need some kind of conflict, whether it's inside the hero or outside the hero. Any questions so far? I know I'm going pretty quick, but like I said, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. Let's talk about the next one, the mentor. And this is, again, the classic Merlin character, right? Arthur, again, let's go back to Arthur. Or if you talk about Neo in the Matrix, his mentor, right? And again, I always like thinking about, you know, the character in the Matrix when they're fighting. Actually, for whatever reason this week, I guess it was because of this this PowerPoint that I was putting together. You know, on Facebook I put up these, like, you know, kind of, you know, guess the quote kind of thing, right? And the one part in the Matrix that I really liked was that fight scene the first time when he actually goes into the Matrix for the first time after he's left the Matrix. He's gone. He's gotten sick. He's gotten a little better. Then he goes and he talks to Tank, and he's inside, you know, the Nebuchadnezzar, and then he's going to sit in the chair for the first time, and Tank goes, "Come on," and he goes, "Hey, I just learned kung fu," right? That part of and which is the most exciting piece for me, right? That's the stuff that makes me boil. I'm like, yeah, I want to learn kung fu, man. Why can't I be a superhero? Come on, I want to be in the Matrix, right? Why? Because we all want to be greater than ourselves, right? Well, the mentor in that movie, he's like, all right, put me into the Matrix with them, okay? And now they're going to put him into this fighting place where he's going to fight with, you know, the main guy, the guy who's his mentor, right? So he's there fighting with his mentor, and he goes, "Come on, don't just try it and hit me, right? Do you really think I'm breathing air here? You know, is this really air? Do you really think that exists in this place?" This kind of stuff that he's talking to him about. He's trying to show him this is the trials of the hero. And the mentor is responsible for giving the hero his lessons. So that way he can journey. It says he's on the journey from the ordinary world where he came from into the new world. This place that he's learning about, that he's new, that we're new because we're watching the story with him. We're behind his back trying to figure out what's going on. What's the mystery of this story? And we're figuring it all out with the hero. That's the most important part. So I think the role of the mentor has a bunch of different, there's different reasons for having him. One is in the story, in the inside, when we're immersed in the story, it's to teach the hero. But the mentor has another job. The mentor is there to teach us when we're watching the story, when we're watching the movie. A good example of this in video games is this tutorial, right? You can play a lot of video games, and the first part of a video game is this whole tutorial, right? Sometimes there's a whole character that's out there, you know, that kind of shows you how to play the game. And then he disappears, or he becomes a sidekick almost afterwards, right? Depending on the kind of type of video game. It's really weird. In this game that I've been playing lately, which is Pillars of Eternity, right? The mentor characters die off in the first scene. As soon as you finish playing the first part, they're dead. They actually die. They're like, what the hell? They just died. My two characters, right? But this is the stuff that the mentor comes on, and he talks to the younger character, this new hero, this budding hero, if you will, to make him into the hero that he has to be to defeat the conflict in the story, to conquer the problem that's been presented at the beginning, right? That's what the mentor is there to do. Sometimes the mentor also can act as a threshold guardian, and we'll talk about threshold guardians later on, where he prevents the hero, says, no, you're not ready yet. And the hero has to kind of say, no, yeah, I am, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's a classic archetype, the mentor. The ally, right? We can't do things alone. You know what they say I hate to say these things, but no man or woman is an island. You know, you can't make it through on your own. Get by with a little help from my friends, that kind of idea. And it's true, in real life, you can't get on your own. Not forever. You know, even though you might think you're rock solid on your own, you need people, you need your friends to get through. And it's not any greater than it should be in a movie or in a book. If a hero is a kind of a loner and he's got no one to depend on, one time the villains are going to beat the crap out of him and he's not going to be able to recover, right? Even Daredevil in the latest version, he's finding friends to help him out, even though he claims to be he works alone, right? And this whole idea of I'm a deep and dark character with a lot of emotional troubles that needs to work alone kind of idea, even them, they have some kind of ally, whether it's an organization, whether it's a group of sidekicks or whatever, or just a co-protagonist, which we'll talk about later on, to help them out. Han Solo is a good co-protagonist, but and let's go back to the Matrix, I like to look at Trinity as a good co-protagonist or ally. She's the one that kind of helps him through, right? Really, really important stuff, and it kind of makes it more interesting as well. If all we do is we hear the story from one point of view, and again, a lot of modern stories are starting to get told again like that. I don't know if you've ever read any books that are urban fantasy, right? If you ever read any urban fantasy books, or they're always read in the first person, right? Which is kind of It kind of had disappeared for a while. But the reason why we write books in the first person, different points of view, who knows why? Why do we write things what's the difference between reading things in the first person or in the third person? There's different kinds of points of view. Do you remember? Ever get taught that in class? Yes. Okay. You're a visitor. You tell me. Just say it. Just talk about it. Why is it so important? What's the difference if I write a book in a first person point of view? What's the advantage of that point of view? Why would I want to write a book in that point of view? Yeah, I'll tell you.
You get to know what the person is thinking.
Sometimes it actually limits our scope. It's almost like variables in programming, right? I always look at it like this. If you think about a third-person point of view, it's like global variables. You know everything. You hear what the person is thinking. You get to know what the other person is saying. You can see things from the kind of from a bird's eye view. It's almost like third-person omniscient, that kind of thing. Then there's also third-person limited, where you get to see the third person, but when you describe the story, you can't see everything. There's still this like fog of war that surrounds everything outside of the immediate scene, right? You don't get to hear the storyteller still only telling you about the main character. They really don't talk about or get into the heads of the villains, right? Typically that's third person limited narrative, right? First person is so limited that you only see what the character sees. And the character is telling the story. And there's a lot of, it's almost like the narrative is I. I did this, I did that, I did this, I'm doing this, I see this. And it kind of brings you closer. It's more of a personable story that gets you into it. The old style detective stories of the 20s and a lot of these new, the contemporary stories, the urban fantasy stories of today, I hate to say this, paranormal romance stories of today, a lot of them are told in this first-person narrative to bring you closer to the story, because otherwise, perchance, you may not be able to relate to it. Here's where a bad version of first-person narrative is typically used. When your visual medium, like a movie, has a narrative beside it. The classic one was Blade Runner, right? I don't know if you remember Blade Runner, if you guys have seen Blade Runner. Some people may have not. The original director's cut of Blade Runner did not include a narrative where the main character talked about stuff. I went here, and then, I couldn't believe I saw her. It's almost like the story's going in the background. Someone's talking about the story. At the same time, we're watching the story. And, the big critique about that from critics is, why does someone have to narrate to us if it's a visual medium? It kind of tells us that the story itself is weak. That's the idea. And yet, Dexter did it, on HBO for 10 years, right? Actually, it's been done a lot. It gets done a lot where you hear a narrative in the background and it talks to you about what's happening in the story, because you know what? Maybe the writers, the director, what have you, is nervous that you won't understand what's going on, right? And the story is not good enough on its own to tell what's happening. A great example of that in video games is when the role-playing game itself has this like tons of narrative that I got to read. I hate that in a role-playing game. I really do. And when it says the stuff, if the guy's talking to me, I'm okay with it. Like if they actually have voices, and again, it's all about scope and money now, right? Because you got to pay some actor to talk to you in a video game, right? But if they're talking to me, it's much better. But if I have to read it, it's not cool at all, guys. I'm like, I don't want a role-playing game that I have to read. If I have to read a role-playing game when I'm playing a visual medium, something's not right, guys. And if we're not quite there yet. Even my latest game here that I'm playing, Pillars of Eternity, there's like stuff where the main characters, your main narrative will happen. You'll get like an actor to actually talk to you and talk about stuff. And then half the time they'll be like me having to read and make choices. Do you want to do this? Oh, I see that your your perception's not high enough. You can't qualify for this response, but they give you the response anyway, right? You can't click on this when it's red because your attribute or whatever is not high enough. But here are the other things you can do, right? Don't show me it if my attribute's not high enough. Hide it from me. I don't want to know, right? But the other thing is like I find the list of responses is cool, and I've seen that in many role-playing games. But I would rather say it. Like I want to hear my character say, "No, man, you're gonna die," and then a response back from the other guy saying like, "So is that where you're gonna take it?" Almost like create that story for me. It breaks my story. It takes me out of it. Kind of it doesn't allow me to keep that suspension of disbelief going when I'm playing the game, when I have to read it. Now I'm back into like, book mode. I'm going into action mode and I'm going back into book mode, and it messes me up. I don't know if you guys feel the same thing. There's got to be something better that comes out. But I digress from the ally. We'll take a bit of break in about 5 minutes and we'll continue when we get back. Guardian. Sometimes, you might think the guardian means someone's going to guard the hero, but actually, I look at him, I think the better word is almost like a threshold guardian. The threshold guardian stops you from going to the next step. Okay, think about the hero. He's on his journey, right? Or she's on her journey, right? And she's got to get to this place, right? And then she's going to go to the next step, but the threshold guardian is going to stop him from happening, right? Whatever it's going to be. In this case, the classic one is the Sphinx. Who's the threshold guardian? Who's the threshold guardian in the Matrix? Who's the guardian, the person that's going to stop Neo from getting to the next step? Who doesn't want him to be there? It's not a shadow character necessarily. The shadow characters are the agents, right? Agent Smith is the shadow character in the Matrix. But who is it that stops him, wants to stop him from getting to accomplish stuff, right? It's Cypher, the guy who wants to eat the steak, even though he knows it's a fake steak, right? Don't tell me, wipe my memory, he says, because I like to eat steak. I want you to make me rich the next time when I go back into the Matrix. That's what he says, right? He's the threshold guardian for Neo. He wants to stop Neo from accomplishing his task. He's also a shadow character because you can take on different roles. But he's the kind of guy that'll try and inject. He's just a normal guy. He's not any kind of, he's not the chosen one. He's not the one, right? He's just a regular dude, man. That's all he is, a regular guy. Don't tell me Neo's special, right? The threshold guardian. The guys who are the naysayers. And there's plenty of them out there. If you think about it, sometimes the mentor is also the threshold guardian, like I said. Like an example of that would be Obi-Wan Kenobi, right, in Star Wars. I hate to use him. I don't want to use Star Wars references too much because I love Star Wars, but it's like way overused. So again, he's like, the old man that's gonna help the young man, and he starts talking to him about the about the future. And Yoda is also an example of a mentor who's also a threshold guardian. Right, in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke Skywalker gets to to Dagobah, right, and he's in the pits with Yoda, right? Yoda says he's too old, right? And Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost comes back and says he'll learn, right? Because Yoda doesn't want to tell him, he doesn't want to show him of the ways of the Force because he knows he's too old to do that, right? And there's a risk that Luke might go down the negative path and become a Dark Jedi or a Sith. Again, back then we didn't know what the Sith was because for Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, they mentioned the Sith, but we didn't know who they were, right? Not until 1, 2, and 3 came out, years and years later. So again, the threshold guardian, the reason why I'm saying threshold guardian and mentor sometimes are the same is because they're another force that tests the hero, that stops the hero from getting through. Sometimes it provides us with our first conflict. Our first test, the hero can actually test his powers out, right? Almost like the person that's been helping the hero along, you think he's been helping the hero along all this time, but really he's not helping the hero at all. He's been trying to lead him down a dark path. And you've seen that many times. A lot of video games do that, where you see the character, he's leading you, he's almost your companion, he's helping you learn the game, right? And then later on, you find out that he's a shadow character. A good example of that on the small screen these days is The Flash, right, with the Reverse Flash. You guys watch The Flash at all? Right? And where the Reverse Flash is actually the guy that's been helping him the whole time, right, through the whole series pretty much, right? So I think that's part of it for me. I think it's, it's understanding these archetypes, right, and bringing these archetypes into the games that you make and the stories that you're going to make for your games. I think this is a great place to pause and take like 5 or 10, go, have a washroom break or whatever and come back. So let's pause it right here, take a bit of a break, and we'll return with the rest.